Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Guys, today I want to talk about patriarchy, chastity, modesty, and contraception. Okay? Patriarchy, chastity, modesty, and contraception. How do these things come together into what we now have in our postmodern deregulated sexual marketplace, and what are the results thereof? Okay, first, the question that I have for you all, the angle at which I'm going to approach this topic is to simply ask, is it necessary, really? Is this idea of fidelity and chastity necessary? I mean, wasn't it needed, for people to be circumspect about chastity or about negotiating their sexual relationships, to be extremely circumspect because the possibility of childbirth existed. It still exists, but I mean, it was more eminently possible that if a woman slept with a man, she'd give birth. Now, with the onset of advanced methods of contraception, for women especially, some now have released some new methods for men too. Perhaps it's just not important anymore. Why do we need it? Why should we? Why should anybody care, right? I mean, haven't we removed the consequences of the act? And well, frankly, many people have, in fact, naturally gravitated towards a more sexually liberal society, as a result of the onset of contraception, because it enabled the consequences to be removed, and therefore women needed to be less circumspect about who they sleep with. There were less factors to be negotiated, and so too men also needed to be less circumspect, although less so, and I'll tell you why in a minute. You see, traditionally, when a woman took a man to herself, she would need to consider a number of things. Because there was the possibility of falling pregnant, she'd need to consider whether A, this man could be a responsible father, B, whether he could provide for her and the offspring that might come from the relationship. At least long enough, obviously, for her to suffer the period of being incapacitated through childbirth and also to be available for nursing. So these are sort of historical ways of doing things. Well, that's no longer the case. A woman can, with a certain degree of certainty, choose a man to sleep with, knowing very well that she's not going to fall pregnant, or likely not to fall pregnant, in case, of course, she misuses or doesn't use the contraception correctly, or there's some sort of mishap or anomaly. Okay, but other than that, she can, with a certain degree of certainty, say, look, I'm not likely to fall pregnant, and so what the hell? I don't need to, look at all these other factors. Okay, that is the one aspect. The other aspect is that since women are increasingly more financially independent than they were in the past, because women were often dependents of man, and women still are, in most third world countries, still dependents of men, they can forego the financial obligations that would be due the man, were he to impregnate her to some extent. Although women often don't forego it, even if they are independently wealthy, they still often sue the man for child support. Right, so there's that aspect too. And then also, because of this thing called single motherhood, this sort of new trend. It's become sort of trendy to be a single mother. You know, I can do it all on my own type thing. Women also might just really need men to donate their sperm, really. And so, you know, there's no need, in essence, to be circumspect about which man it is. It could be any man, right? As long as he's genetically sound and he can donate his sperm. So those are sort of the things that are taking place, and which sort of challenges the more traditional narrative that chastity is important. So I'm saying, is chastity important? And in light of what I've said now, the answer is no, it's not. Okay? But then isn't there perhaps more to it? And so here is where I sort of diverge off into the traditional narrative. And that is to say that when a woman is looking to have a family, there are certain values that she comes with, okay? And one of those values, or the thing which gives her a higher status, is in fact her chastity. Okay, remember that very often in societies where women are not financially independent and capable, they don't actually bring anything to the relationship except themselves. Okay, and men are often very happy to accept a woman who's young, who's beautiful, and who's been chaste, who has not been around the block, you know, just as she is, without anything, because her value is in herself. Okay, it's intrinsic. Okay, whereas the value of men often is extrinsic. It is what he's able to bring to the table, not who he is as a person. Okay, and hence the greater emphasis in traditional societies on a woman's chastity and not so much on a man's chastity. We'll find in many traditional societies, men have rarely been chaste. Men, for the vast majority of history, have been polygynous. They've had several women, but women were generally expected to be monogamous. And that is because she was valued within herself as what she is and not what she can bring to the table. And it was known then, and as it is still known now, instinctively within men, that when they want to make a long-term commitment, when they want to have a family, they go for the woman that has the lowest body count, that has slept around the least, or preferably a virgin, because a virgin is known, it is not so much that she's a virgin actually. The virgin part is only indicative of her being able to properly and emotionally pair bond and commit, not from an ethical standpoint, but from an emotional standpoint, to that man for life. And so as we see in traditional societies, whether it be British Victorian societies or Eastern, Middle Eastern and Far Eastern societies, women were often married off at quite a young age, okay? You find women being married at 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 even, because there was a sort of deep understanding of that issue. Now, of course, I'm not advocating that. I'm just discussing this more or less academically, okay? And so that was sort of the value of chastity. Chastity was in the interest of a long-term, deep, meaningful, emotional connection to one particular man that would enable the man and the woman to, in fact, build a home and a family, okay? And we see, I think, the evidence of that in modern society with the decline of actual families as probably an indication that at least if we said that families are a good thing, if that was our view, we'd say that we went wrong with the culture of infidelity and sexual promiscuity. Right. So guys, the thing is that where I'm getting at with this, and let me get to the patriarchy part, okay? So I spoke about the chastity part, I spoke about the infidelity part, I spoke about the contraception part. Let me get to the patriarchy part, okay? There's another sort of overarching construct behind all these narratives, and that is a sort of patriarchy versus matriarchy scenario. And let me break it down further, okay? In the more sort of postmodern society, we're heading more towards a matriarchy, because matriarchy historically and matriarchy now is has always been a permissive. Matriarchal societies has always been permissive, has always been a promiscuous society, okay? When we look at the last matriarchy somewhere in China, we see that some of those men testify to having slept with over 100 women because they have something called a walk-in marriage. So the woman is there and the man just walks in, basically, for the night and sleeps with her, and that's called a walk-in marriage. It's like perfectly legit in that society. And while that in modern society would look like liberation, mainly the liberation of women, and there's a reason for that too, in that society, in the matriarchal society, a lot of women have actually advocated not to have that and have looked to move away from that society where they can actually marry a traditional Chinese man and be looked after and have a family, okay? Because in that society, women are not afforded the luxury of being looked after because that's not how matriarchies work, okay? So there is a certain amount of agency that goes with being in a matriarchal society, greater agency for women, and that is true, but also it results in greater responsibility, and that's just a natural way that things work in all societies. Eventually, these things catch up, right? Which is what has happened in Western societies. In postmodern Western societies, we have found, wa alaikum salam, روح هناك أيوة ولوفت يمين. Okay. So what happens is in postmodern Western societies we find that people are women are now having to look after themselves by necessity, because things have caught up. When women advocated for the right to engage in all forms of work and to compete with men in the work environment, it was usually from the standpoint of women, by and large, who were being looked after by the men in their family, their husbands, their fathers, and so on. But now, of course, things have changed because it has adjusted. Things have caught up. And now it's not anymore a matter of women working because it's their right to work or because it's their choice to work. It's now resulted in women have to work because they have to work, because they now need to feed themselves. They, in fact, now cannot rely on men as they once used to, because in the past it was a situation where it was normal to rely on men. Okay, and now it's not normal anymore, and from it not being normal, now it's becoming impossible to rely on men often in those societies, not because men have become unreliable, which is partly true. Men have increasingly also become unreliable, but also because men are increasingly unable to accomplish much or the same, or get those high-earning jobs. Since in the market of the job market, the more competition there is, the more labor there is, the more competition there is for the same jobs, the lower the income. And so hence, if women have half the jobs or even more than half the jobs, it means that a lot of men will be out of work because there are only so many jobs. And even if all the men are working, they're only going to receive half the money they would have traditionally received when only men, or when men were by and large holding most of the jobs. So that's just a natural consequence of the society. And so that's where sort of the matriarchy side of things come into play. When women are given greater autonomy, they are also naturally given greater responsibility. You can't have it all. Society does adjust itself, which is what has happened, and also why the society is more permissive, because there isn't a steady or stable reference point for women to meet their sexual needs, okay? Women increasingly do not have a husband or a steady boyfriend or someone that they go to that is their steady reference point for their sexual needs. And so very often you will find that women who are extremely career-driven and career-orientated and single do often have multiple sexual partners, 15, 20, 30 and upwards. You know, those are statistically true. And the reason for that is not simply just because they're bad or evil or don't care. It's because they have sexual needs and there isn't a stable reference point for those sexual needs. And then they are driven to have their sexual needs meted out by the men that are available and the men that, are willing. And quite frankly, it's easy for a woman to get a man to have her sexual needs met because she just needs to offer herself up, and any number of men would accept the invitation. One study at one university that I read about talks about a woman. They set a woman up to go around, a woman to go around the university and offer casual sex to men, and found that 90% of men responded positively, meaning they agreed to it, whereas when a man did the same thing, or men went around doing the same thing, only a very small percentage, I think it was less than 20% of women were even remotely interested. So we see also that getting to the patriarchal side of things, women have generally been and are generally the gatekeepers to sex, unless of course they are raped, which is then a man or men perpetrating violence against women. So women are generally, where consent is given, the gatekeepers to the equation, because in that regard, women are more powerful than men are regarding the sexuality, because they just really need to open their legs and 10 men will come running. So in that regard, we come to the issue of patriarchy and chastity, okay? So patriarchy, the belief in many patriarchal societies is that men are responsible for, in part, men and society, and the society of men are responsible for keeping women chaste, okay? Because women are not chaste by themselves. They are chaste in relation to men, okay? So that is kind of the premise of patriarchal societies, which is why patriarchal societies enjoy a higher degree of chastity, especially on the part of the woman, not so much on the part of men, okay? How that works is also quite interesting, because if you're saying that the men are not as chaste as the women, so who are the men being unchaste with? Well, a lot of the times it's women from outside that society. So that is what happens. يعطيك العافية. عفوا. So what happens is we find that being the case, they keep their woman chaste, and how they do that is quite interesting, okay? Because we find that often, like I've mentioned before, a lot of women who do practice a lot of live promiscuous lives, it is not that they are essentially evil or bad or want to live promiscuous lives. It's that their lives do not afford them to have a steady male in their lives that they can have as a consistent reference point. They do not have a long-term stable partner, but then they haven't lived their lives or set their lives up in that way. Okay? As regarding the patriarchy, you find that women are guarded by men constantly from the exploits of other men. So what happens is a woman cannot just be approached by a random man for some sort of sexual encounter, nor can she offer herself up to some random man for some sexual encounter. Okay, so the offering and acceptance of a sexual encounter in those societies happen through the mediation of men, of family, of relatives, etc. And so it is harder for women to exercise sexual freedom in that regard, meaning casually, okay? What happens then is that when a man is interested in a woman or a woman is interested in a man, the man is often vetted by other men in the society to try to ascertain whether he is serious about her, serious enough to commit to her in the long term. So this is sort of a vetting process that happens in patriarchy, okay, or societies that evolved out of patriarchy. This vetting process is partly what has kept women chaste, okay? And we all know as men that very often there are few women who are actually governed by moral convictions, okay? Mostly, we find a lot of the times that women are governed by emotional connections. And so, you know, if you win a woman's heart, for example, through her emotions, very often, you will see it very often with women who are married to very bad men. You find them running after the man. You find that the man beats her up and she keeps running after him. You find that he neglects her. He is on the whole a terrible partner to her, but she remains loyal and faithful and dedicated and devoted to him. Well, that's because he won her emotions, okay? So, because we know that as men, that a way to a woman's heart is really through her emotions and not through her rational being, we know also that any number of men could exploit that factor in women if they wanted to sleep with them and if they had free access to them. And so in patriarchal societies, men are not given free access to women. They are simply not given free access to women because patriarchal societies has evolved to understand that chastity cannot be maintained entirely in a society where men are given free access to women unless those men are loyal and committed men, meaning partners, marriage. So if the woman gets married to the man, of course, then he's given free access to her. But if she doesn't, then he's not. So that is the nature of patriarchal societies, because patriarchal societies, it is the society and the men in the society that mitigate, okay, and facilitate the chastity and longevity of chaste relationships in the society. And so that's kind of where I leave you. I'm not saying better or worse, okay? I am obviously in favor of marriage and chastity, but I'm also not really saying better or worse. I'm saying that's what it is. It is what it is. You decide what you want to do and how you want to live. That's none of my business, okay? But these are things under consideration. Basically, if you want complete autonomy and independence, and you don't want to be sort of within the ambit of a man, then likely your lifestyle would veer towards promiscuity. But if you sort of are within the ambit of a man, your lifestyle will veer towards fidelity and chastity, because it is men essentially that in the long run do keep women chaste, okay? Because she has that under consideration. When a woman is married to a man, she's like, I'm married, so I'm not going to fool around because I'm married. So her loyalty, her commitment, her emotional connection to the man keeps her safe from other men. And so that is sort of the parting message. You decide what you want to do. Thank you very much.